For Newstalk Sport, I'm Cian Murtagh.
Newstalk weather, thanks to Ryanair. Now with more flights to Europe's business cities than any other airline. Ryanair. Low fares made simple.
Continuing dry and clear in the north tonight, humid and mostly dry elsewhere with just a few showers and lowest temperatures of 10 to 13 degrees. Sunny spells and showers for Tuesday. And now you're up to date on Newstalk.
Thank you very much. Very welcome back. Tom Dunne with you till 12, and still to come in the next hour. I think I might have to go a little bit more from the Frank and Walters, to be honest, and more from Radiohead as well. And keep your texts coming on that. Generally, it seems to be overall pretty much thumbs up. There's some absolutely gorgeous stuff on it so far. So I'd say I'm the same boat as many people, just getting more time with it. 53106 for your text. Email tom@newstalk.com. Going to be talking all about a man called Gene Clark in a minute. He had an album in 1974 which many people think is an all-time classic, and I'll be playing a track from that. But back in the day, he was in the Byrds for some of the early albums they released, and was pretty much their dominant songwriter in those early days, writing songs like these. Beautiful. That is the Byrds and 8 Miles High, and it's going to be Tuesday, 24th of May. That's some of Dublin's finest musicians, including Peter Smith from the Urges, Anderson Ross Hammer from Jet Setter, David Tapey of Tan and Felix, and others will be performing cover versions of their favourite Gene Clark songs, spanning his entire career, including Polly, Out on Your Side, Set You Free This Time, White Light, and many, many more. And also, as part of that, John Rogan, one of the world's most foremost experts, the Byrds, will be reading an exclusive extract from his forthcoming book, Requiem for the Timeless, Volume 2. And Johnny's on the phone. Johnny, how are you tonight?
I'm very good, thanks.
Every circle I go to, you're described as the world's foremost expert on the Byrds.
Okay, I can live with that.
Yeah, I mean, if we have a pub quiz, you'd be the man I'd need on my side with this. You've written many, many books on various different people like Neil Young and the Smiths and Roxy Music, but the Byrds seem to be one that occupies a certain place in your heart, is it?
Oh, certainly, yes. That was where it all started for me, I think, back in 1965 when Mr. Tambourine Man came out. I knew how important that record was, and I'd been following Dylan for much of the year as well. And I remember when they first came over here in August, here in England, in August 65, and it was an incredible, the best summer in pop music ever, I've always claimed. That
sounds like a title for a book, Johnny.
Well, you know, it is. I mean, you could do a book on that summer alone. I mean, you had Help, Satisfaction by the Stones, Like a Rolling Stone, as I said, by Dylan, even Sonny and Cher and Barry Maguire, I Got You, Babe, and Barry Maguire's Eva Destruction. I mean, those are the minor ones.
Yeah,
and
there was just recently there was a book saying 1966, I think, was the pivotal year in music, and there was one then.
I reviewed it for the Irish Times. Sorry.
And there was one recently saying 91, or no, 71.
71, yeah, that was Hepworth's book,
which was great as well. So I'm just wondering now if there might be another one here. 65 could be a good year to make a case for.
Well, you know, I remember. You should add that the 71 was because of the albums and the 66 was because of the singles. Yeah. So, you know, they both had their cases there. But I thought 65 was most important. But I said in my review of that book that you could actually choose at least 5 years, maybe even 6 from the 60s, and argue the point that they were the most important years. 67 being a good example as well.
It was a ripe time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When you say you discovered them at that time, what were you doing? I mean, were you a journalist at that time, or were you...
No, I was a schoolboy.
A schoolboy?
Yeah, I was... I wasn't even a teenager, actually.
Right.
But I was into music very early on and bought singles regularly and followed their career from there. The first album I bought was the Byrds' Mr. Tambourine Man, and it continued throughout my life. My first book on the Byrds was published when I was still at university, and I'd written about them before then, and I got to interview them and all their acolytes. I mean, it was a strange idea back then to even do a book, because there weren't any rock books at that stage, apart from the Beatles and Elvis, I think, and maybe one on the Stones, but nothing that substantial. It was, believe it or not, the era before the rock book.
It's hard to believe now, isn't it?
It is astonishing because they come out every week.
Every week. And was it a dream come true for you to get to meet them?
Yeah, but I was very professional about it. It wasn't as if I was overawed. I went in there seeking information and perspective on the whole thing, and I went to LA, met Michelle Phillips there, and I just remember going to various parties, and I was still a student then. I think I'd saved up. I won a scholarship and saved the money from it and starved myself and went to LA and stayed there for quite a while, and it was a funny period because it was the end of the 70s, so hedonism was high on the agenda for everybody back then. They were all high on the hog at that stage. They were still Byrds, and they were still living that dream life in LA, completely unaware that the 80s was about to descend upon them and they would all be scattered. They all had record contracts, solo ones virtually, at the end of the 70s. And I think by 1980, none of them had solo contracts, including, most remarkably of all, David Crosby. And he came to me in 1980 and said, "Man, they turned down my record," as if it was almost impossible that anybody could do that.
That's really punk rock, isn't it? That's slowly turning things around, a new wave, and people like
it's really the new wave in the States.
just turning. It's the same effect the Beatles had, really, isn't it? Just a little bit slower to wipe them out. Tastes have changed. You're gone. So when you met them, tell me, Gene seems like a really interesting person in the Byrds history. He's one of the very first Byrds, isn't he? He's the founding member.
Yeah, he was the founding member along with McGuinn, and Crosby met them almost days after that, and they formed a trio called the Jet Set, provisionally called. And of course they soon discovered that they needed a drummer and a bass player, so they recruited Mike Clark, and the last one to join was the bassist Chris Hillman. And they got the contract with CBS, and did Mr. Tambourine Man. In 3 months it was out, and then it was a number one in the UK and the US, and pretty well around the world, as I recall. It was an astonishing period. They then did All I Really Want to Do, which didn't do so well in the States, but was a top 4 hit in the UK, and then finally at the end of the year, Turn, and they were back at number one in America. So, and then onwards to 8 Miles High, and then Gene leaves just as 8 Miles High is coming out. So
it seems like
sad.
A crazy thing to do, because I mean they're on fire. The number ones everywhere. If you stayed in position, as it were, you'd imagine that you would have done very well for a long time. Why would he want to leave such a band in such a position that he had started?
Well, it's a suicidal thing in certain ways, because if you think about it, at that point, groups were very solid and they were doing well, and you didn't leave a big group like that. You don't find a Beatle leaving or a Stone leaving. It doesn't happen. And he went off on his own. I mean, there's a lot of stories about that. You could talk for 20 minutes on that alone. I mean, there was his fear of flying, general neuroses. There was rivalry in the group over songwriting income and things like that. Those are probably subsidiary factors. But I think it was just the sheer tension of going on tour and being in a world-famous act like that. And, he'd come from Kansas, Missouri. He was very ambitious. And in some ways, he was the most hedonistic of all of them at the beginning. But he also had that spiritual side and that rural side to his personality. And, it just became all too much for him. And effectively, he had a nervous breakdown, and it was on a plane. He just got off the plane. McGuinn turned around and said, you can't be a bird if you can't fly.
It's one of the great quotes.
Yeah.
It's such an amazing moment, but a breakdown. So he's really finding this very, very tough. And is that something that he managed to turn around, or how was it for him when he left?
I don't think he ever fully turned it round, because quite simply he seldom, if ever, toured. He did sporadic tours now and again, but as for compared to the status that he had, he should have been doing far more live performances and all the rest of it. I mean, you must also remember that he almost effectively kick-started that singer-songwriter movement. His first album came out in 1967, Gene Clark with the Gosdin Brothers, and it was real singer-songwriter stuff. And this is long before people like Crosby, Stills and Nash came along or had left their respective groups. He was the first kind of guy to leave a major group like that and go out and try and become a solo act. You also must remember his contribution to what would later be called country rock. He did the fantastic expedition of Dillard and Clark, and Dillard and Clark also did Through the Morning, Through the Night. And these were on major labels in A&M when you think about it, and all his records were on major labels, Asylum later and RSO, even the Bee Gees Robert Stigwood label. So he was a pretty prominent figure, but he'd always find a way to somehow self-sabotage his career.
Was it self-sabotage, or was it just a lack of sales?
Well, the two go together. If you're not promoting a record properly, particularly at that stage, you're not going to get the backing of the sales force or anybody else, and it's difficult to sell without promoting. And I think he was always reluctant to do that, and that affected his standing in the music business in LA to a certain extent. It
seems
for sure.
a bit weird that he is releasing, as you say, kickstarting the singer-songwriter scene and not doing very well with it, and then he's in LA. He's probably, he's certainly moving in the same circles as people like Neil Young. And then a few years later, early 70s, singer-songwriters, they're just, slaying the land with their albums.
Well, they are, and he had two shots at it. If you think of him as a singer-songwriter at that time, he released in 1971. He released White Light, which is an austere but compelling record, and very Dylan-esque in its way. Would seem to have fitted perfectly with the Neil Young side of things, and I was big into Neil Young at the time, too, of course. But I think that record was austere, and in a way, it didn't have the sweet quality that you'd associate with the contemporary songwriters of the time. I mean by that people like James Taylor or Carole King.
Yeah.
They'd always find a way to find a radio-friendly single on there. And Neil had Crosby, Stills and Nash almost to effectively promote him and his solo work. So, and he was ambitious in his own way. But Gene, I think that record was probably too austere, and it became, I think it was voted Album of the Year in Holland by their major rock paper. But you're right, it didn't sell that well. And he then went on to Asylum, and you mentioned No Other, which is also the
74,
and that's the title of our celebration of Gene Clark upcoming. I mean, No Other is Clark's masterpiece, I think, undoubtedly. I mean, it's an astonishing fusion of country, choral, gospel, and it still sounds breathtaking in its audacity and ambition. And I've never, from the moment I first heard it, I thought this is bizarre, because White Light was such an austere record, and here we have such an extravagantly produced record. They were almost, complete opposites in a way.
I'm still amazed by his lack of success. As a 74, he's with David Geffen is the label head, who's the man who's going to make everybody rich. Everything he touches after this is going to be successful. This is the one thing he can seem to make successful. Why? I mean, you've described it as a masterpiece. He's with David Geffen. Why isn't this working?
I think, again, there was a conflict with Geffen over the record, and there were only 8 songs on it, and they're quite long. But so what? I mean, we can talk about Astral Weeks and other such albums at the time that didn't have necessarily 12 songs on them, and had lengthy songs too. There were others of the time. It wasn't unique. I suppose you could say, I could throw it back to you and say, well, what about David Blue and Judy Sill? They were on Geffen and they didn't make it either.
True enough.
Having said that, the Eagles did. And of course, the first Eagles album contains Train Leaves Here This Morning, which is a Gene Clark song. So
that must have been a nice little learner for him, at least.
It was, yes, it would have been. It would have been better if it had been on Hotel California, of course. Then he could have retired for the umpteenth time. But he did well out of that, that's for sure.
It seemed to be a bit disjointed after that. It didn't seem like he ever really achieved what people thought he was going to achieve when he left the Byrds.
Well, you must remember that this is almost a decade after he's left, and he did, in that late 70s period, get back together with McGuinn and Chris Hillman for the McGuinn-Clark-Hillman albums, and there was one really of the three of them, and the two in which he vaguely partook, let's say. But the drugs got to him at that stage. I mean, he made so much. They had a massive advance when they did that record. It was three Byrds being brought together, and they were on 3 separate record companies at the time, and then suddenly the bidding war started, and they were really hyped quite highly. But I don't think the records were that strong. And of course, Gene wandered off again. He did it again and again and again. It wasn't a one-off thing. He actually rejoined the Byrds for about 5 minutes, actually a few weeks, in 67, a year and a half after he'd left, more or less. And he lasted a few weeks because they fired David Crosby and decided it would be a good idea to bring Clark back, but he couldn't tour. He was so nervous. He just had to leave.
You met him a few times, did you?
I did indeed, yes. Different time periods as well, which is always interesting. One of the things I always do is try to go back to see people in different decades to get a different perspective on what they might have told me the first time around. And he was a complex character. Again, I was aware of that spirituality that he had, combined with this intense hedonism. I mean, he really was a Hollywood guy in some respects, and a kind of rural Mendocino guy in another. And I don't think he ever reconciled the two in his mind. It's almost like the fame was fatal for him, but terribly attractive.
Yeah. Oh God, I wish I wasn't doing this.
Yeah.
He died tragically young. He really did. 25 years ago, he's gone. It's hard to believe, isn't it? On the night, people will be paying tribute with the songs, and I presume loads of songs from the No Other album, which I'm going to play a track from now. But you're going to be reading from the new book as well.
Yeah, I'm going to do some readings from the new book. I think they're showing part of the film, The Bird That Flew Alone, which came out a couple of years ago, and I contributed to that, and I think they're going to play some of that there. Yeah. And I'm bringing over Tony Poole, who you might remember from Storyard and Laughing, a CBS group in the 70s, and he's a Byrds fanatic, and their whole career was based around the Byrds, so he's got a lot of songs to play as well, or not that many, but a few anyway.
Yeah. Should be great. Your new book's going to be called The Byrds Requiem for the Timeless, Volume 2.
Well, I did Volume 1, which I hope you received. Maybe you didn't, but that was, I think, 1,200 pages, as I recall.
That's a big book.
Yeah. Well, Volume 2 is going to be the same, and I had to do... Well, Graham Parsons is in it. There's a massive section on him, section on Gene Clark, and others too. So it's been like doing 5 books in one, which is why it's taken several years and more to complete.
I don't think they get enough attention, especially in the world of the reissues on vinyl, which is going crazy at the moment, as you know. They've so many beautiful albums and beautiful album covers.
Yeah, well, they had their time for that. They I think Sundays in the States did quite a few back, but it's been a few years now. Maybe it's time for another issue. Well, we had they've had the box set treatment twice, so it's very difficult unless you can unearth some new material. It's a problem. But having said that, there is a new release coming out on Gene Clark called The Lost Studio Sessions, which is coming out on Sierra, and that's a real bonus for collectors because it's a massive archive of unreleased material from 1964 to 82, and that's going to come out round about his anniversary, which, of course, in case you didn't know, is also the same day as Dylan's 75th birthday. So I think we should do a Dylan song on the night as well.
At the very least, Johnny, thanks very much for joining us. I hope you have a great time on the 24th. Some great talent playing on the night. I know many of the bands who are involved, and the song's going to be great as well. So we might talk to you again when Requiem for the Timeless Volume 2 hits the shelves.
Indeed. Well, thanks for that, Tom. I might even hold you to it. Okay.
Please do. Look forward to it. Not enough people talking about Graham Parsons. So, Johnny, thanks very much indeed. This is Gene Clark and Silver Raven.
Turn their tide upon
isn't it? That is from No Other, the solo album from 74 from Gene Clark. That's called Silver Raven George. He used to absolutely love that album as well. I remember him. I think that was the track actually he got me to play one night when we were talking about it. And No Other, a celebration of Gene Clark. That'll be taking place in MPV in Dublin on the 24th of May, which, as Johnny was saying, is Bob Dylan's 75th birthday. Is Bob Dylan about to release a new album, another American Standards album as well. I really enjoyed the last one too. In just a few days, so we'll have that for you very soon too. Tickets are €12. They're available from eventbrite.ie. And watch out for Johnny's forthcoming book, The Byrds, Requiem for the Times, Volume 2. And that's tracing all of their solo careers. Let me see now. Tony McCabe, who knows things, saying, Tom, I love Gene Clark's music, but let's face it, as a human being, he left a lot to be desired. Possibly a big part of his lack of success. That seemed to be what Johnny was saying between the lines there, wasn't it? Right, the Radiohead debate continues. An email from Jake and Loud saying, Tom and Emma, Back to the Future with a touch of the much maligned prog rock landscape/soundscape feel from a few of the new Radiohead tracks he played last night. Some reminded me of Tractor, one of John Peel's Labours of Love from his old Dandelion label days. It's funny, my friend Pat Fitzpatrick, who was very instrumental in helping me pick tracks for the prog rock night that we did, he constantly says King Crimson is the one he keeps name checking about Radiohead, and says they're definitely listening to loads of King Crimson. But anyway, put that from your mind and have a quick break and get ready to hear more Radiohead. Glass Eyes after this.
Tom Dunne on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Ordered something yesterday from appliancesdelivered.ie? Right on time. Get lowest prices and next day delivery nationwide from appliancesdelivered.ie.
The Pat Kenny Show.
The 19th Jack and Jill Annual Golf Classic, which will raise vital funds for the children's charity, takes place.
For Newstalk Sport, I'm Keen Marsa.
Newstalk weather, thanks to Ryanair. Now with more flights to Europe's business cities than any other airline. Ryanair. Low fares made simple.
Continuing dry and clear in the north tonight, humid and mostly dry elsewhere with just a few showers and lowest temperatures of 10 to 13 degrees. Sunny spells and showers for Tuesday. And now you're up to date on Newstalk.
Thank you very much. Very welcome back. Tom Dunne with you till 12, and still to come in the next hour. I think I might have to go a little bit more from the Frank and Walters, to be honest, and more from Radiohead as well. And keep your texts coming on that. Generally, it seems to be overall pretty much thumbs up. There's some absolutely gorgeous stuff on it so far. So I'd say I'm in the same boat as many people, just getting more time with it. 53106 for your text. Email tom@newstalk.com. Going to be talking all about a man called Gene Clark in a minute. He had an album in 1974 which many people think is an all-time classic, and I'll be playing a track from that. But back in the day, he was in the Byrds for some of the early albums they released, and was pretty much their dominant songwriter in those early days, writing songs like these.